Selecting a statistical test. So now let's talk a little bit about some of the factors that we need to take into account as we select a test or a statistical test that we're going to make use of with our data. So the first thing we need to take into mind or keep in mind is the purpose, and this is of our research. What exactly are we trying to show? So if we're trying to show causality, then obviously we're going to use statistical tests that can show us causality. Whereas if we are trying to show something else, maybe we're just trying to be descriptive. In that case, we don't necessarily want the same types of tools that we would use for causality. We want to use a different type of statistics. So these are the two things. In this case, we're going to be looking for relationships. In this case, we're going to be looking for those parameters of the overall population that we talked about. We also need to take into account the type of variable. And again, this is it parametric? Is it non-parametric? What are some of the other components of that variable? We need to take into account the number of variables. Are we looking for, or do we have one variable, or do we have, 3 variables? Do we have n variables? How many variables are we looking at? If we're looking to see the relationship between 3 variables, that's going to limit the types of tests that we can do to the types of tests that are good at that, maybe an ANOVA or something like that. So the number of variables is a key thing to keep in mind. We also want to look at the nature of the overall population. This is something that we need to, this is the target. And again, this is the population parametric or non-parametric. So this is going to be related to our type of variable. And then we also have the groups. We need to take into account the groups, the number, the size, and this is going to be groups within our sample size. Are there different groups that we need to be taking into account, and are we looking for relationships between the groups, or are we looking for membership in groups? Who's a member of which group? These are things that we need to keep in mind. And then also, is our sample going to be dependent on that grouping variable? So again, these are the items that we need to keep in mind. What is the purpose of our research? What is the type of the variable, and related to that, the nature of the target population? Are we looking at nominal, ordinal, interval, ratio data? And is our population parametric or non-parametric? How many variables do we have, and are we looking for relationships between variables, or are we just looking to measure those variables? And then within those variables, we need to look at the number, size, and independence of the groups of data that we've collected. And we're not going to go into this in a lot of detail right now, but our text gives an excellent set of tables. So this is one from the slides that came with our textbook. So we can see in this case, again, if we have parametric data versus non-parametric data, these are the tests that we can look at. So if we're looking for the difference between variables, these are some of the tools that we can use for that. And again, here we've got our various flavors of ANOVA, and then we've got our t-test, one sample, independent measures t-test. If we're looking at non-parametric, we've got a number of tests there. And then if we're looking for associations, of course, we can do regression tests. We can also look for correlation coefficients, and again, here we've got correlation on the other side as well. So this is the sort of the collection of tests that we can use for inferential statistics. Now, there's also a very large table in our textbook that I want to draw your attention to that I think is a great resource as you're doing research going forward. Look at that table and see what are the things that I want to identify, and how can I make use of this table to identify what are the statistical tests that would be appropriate to pull out the data that I want. So again, if I'm looking for a difference, I would begin to look for an ANOVA test, whereas if I'm looking for an association, maybe I'll look for a regression. So that is if I have parametric data. And this is how we can use a table like this to identify the types of tests that we need.